Hey everyone, we have a great interview for you today. I am joined now by Jordan Chariton of Status Coup, which on April 23rd is premiering their first full length documentary, Flushing Flint. Jordan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I think most people first saw you in your reporting with the Young Turks. A lot of your reporting was around Flint. Do you want to discuss this film and how your reporting plays into it?
Yeah, so when I was at the Young Turks, I reported in Flint quite extensively, and going back so many times, you kind of build up sources. So last spring, summer, I was being told by some folks on the ground that I know there that the state of Michigan, during the water testing, checking for lead and copper, had actually tested the wrong way. So, I kind of just began by just knocking on a few doors, seeing if I could find examples of homes that had officials come in, if their water was tested, and whether it was tested the right way. And it was really mind-boggling. I mean, corruption does not really surprise me. There's a lot of it, but I was even stunned. The more doors I knocked on, we started finding out that state officials had gone in and actually ran the water on as many as 35 homes we found before testing, which might sound kind of so what, but it's actually against the EPA's main drinking water regulation, which says you have to basically, the water can't be used for at least 6 hours, and then you have to take the sample right away after turning the tap on, because if you flush the water, even for like 30 seconds to a minute, you're basically flushing away the evidence. So
Mm-hmm.
essentially, the same environmental agency that caused the water crisis in the first place, they were essentially kind of cooking the data. So that the documentary will show not only our like door knocking. I mean, it's not pretty. I was sweating over the summer along with my partner Jen, knocking on these doors. But you'll also see the human toll and the personal
Yeah.
stories of babies we met that had white blisters all over their legs and arms from bathing in this water, not 5 years ago, like last year, still actively.
Yeah.
So that's what the documentary shows.
So, talk a little bit more about your experience with the residents there. So, you talked to a lot of people on the ground. Uh, how has their experience been, and what are the kinds of things that they're suffering from?
Yeah, I always call it kind of like if you ever watch the show Lost. A lot of the residents there kind of feel like they're on a deserted island, just screaming for a helicopter.
Yeah.
The Flint water crisis, if you remember, it got media attention for like a week or two, but with the golden escalator of Trump and then Russia, I mean, these people have been forgotten. So
Yeah.
the people there, honestly, next week is 5 years since this water was switched, and they're just beaten down. I mean, emotionally, physically, and more concerning is just the grotesque levels of illness there. I mean, you have residents still, even though the governor last year, based on this, the ex-governor now, declared the water safe based on this data that we
Yeah.
found. You have residents still getting rashes from the water. You have residents still losing hair from the water. I have speaking with residents that have nosebleeds from the water. Residents that I interviewed that you will see in this documentary now have cancers. You have residents, I
Wow.
mean, children that I've spoken with that are literally, they used to know the whole alphabet. Now they're stuck after F. Same thing with counting numbers. So there's the immediate issues of rashes, hair loss, these kinds of things. And then there's the cumulative illnesses that lead doesn't just affect you right then and there. The effects and the cognitive delays, behavioral problems, those kind of things increase over the years. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really, it's, you want to talk about a national emergency. This is a national emergency. And unfortunately, because of the last Republican governor, because of, in my view, spineless Republicans and Democrats, frankly, nationally, uh, people have been left to fend for themselves. And I'm sure, think of a nice neighborhood in Canada or where I live in New York City, the National Guard would have been in probably in a
Mm-hmm.
week, and this would have
Yeah.
been fixed. So it's really, I think you'll see in the documentary that this is still very much a crisis. It never stopped being a crisis, but the media, unfortunately, stopped covering it.
So, what has the reaction been from Trump's EPA? Because you discussed how the water levels were taken. Has there been any reaction to your reporting on this so far?
Yeah, so twofold. Number one, it's kind of I want to make a point about the media.
Yeah.
A lot of media outlets would not cover this and wouldn't even go with the story because it wasn't connected to Trump. This actually started under President Obama. So the manipulation of the testing started in 2016 when President Obama was still president. Granted, I mean, it was the state of Michigan's environmental agency doing it, so I can't blame Obama for this data being manipulated. But Trump's EPA today, in efforts to get them to do you stand by the state of Michigan's testing that we found was manipulated, they're basically kind of covering their eyes and looking the other way, which is not a surprise. The EPA over the years, both under Obama and Trump, has essentially swept it under the rug. And the comments I'm getting from Trump's EPA now are the state of Michigan, the city of Flint's water testing is meeting regulations based on the state of Michigan Environmental Agency's testing. Hopefully now that the governor actually just publicly confirmed our reporting. And, I'm sending this stuff out like a madman, but I got to tell you, Dave, it's almost like you got to prove that Putin's involved to get the media to care. It's really that difficult. And it's really beyond Flint. It's just about what kind of country do you want to live in. If man-made decisions have poisoned residents, wealthy residents or poor residents, should we leave them to die? Because that's really what's been done. The door knocking we did, really remarkable. Pretty much every block you start hearing from residents, oh, do you know if that person still lives there because they didn't answer the door? Oh, that person just died. I'm not talking about like older people. I'm talking about people in their 30s, 40s, 50s. So it's a real disaster, not only of government, but of media.
Yeah, so talk a little bit more about the media failure on this, because this was actually a story that Rachel Maddow at the beginning of it did discuss a lot in terms of Flint, but she was sort of taken over by the whole Russiagate narrative and even the media as a whole. I mean, you're an independent journalist. You were down there on the ground. You don't have the resources that these networks do. Why have MSNBC, CNN, and all these other mainstream outlets, why have they failed in terms of reporting on what's happening in Flint?
They got 5 hours. So, I used to work at MSNBC and I used to work at Fox News for a dark period of my life. So I know a little bit about corporate outlets. And the bottom line is, when you have the majority of the media, it's like the lack of diversity in government. It's not just lack of diversity as far as race or gender. It's lack of diversity based on economic status. So when you have, generally speaking, corporate outlets, whether it's Rachel Maddow, the New York Times, living in a coastal bubble, far removed from the struggling people of Flint, by human nature, they just don't care as much. And when you have somebody like Trump coming down an escalator, your ratings are going up, your clicks are going up if you're the Times. I mean, even, frankly, independent outlets. I fought with the Young Turks sometimes when I was there about sending me to Flint more and covering it on the main show more. You're just kind of removed from what's going on there. And in terms of this story, actually, full disclosure, was supposed to be published by Newsweek magazine. They killed it the day before. And they said it to me. They actually said, as in politics, when you're explaining, you're losing, meaning it was too hard to explain. Well, all I could tell you is the Solicitor General of Michigan in the Attorney General's office understands, because she met with me in February about this, and we've been in communication since. So, bottom line, I think the media, it's a mix of, I think because Trump is so viscerally horrendous. Obviously, his policies are awful, too. But because corporate media has essentially become just a food fight and a narrative and sensationalism, actual scandal. I mean, this is a scandal. They cooked the test. They cooked the numbers.
Yeah.
Isn't treated as such. And I just want to make clear, because I get a lot of comments like, it's not just Flint. I mean, yes, we found this in Flint. But they're doing this kind of stuff in other cities. Water contamination is spreading. I mean, you have Detroit, Milwaukee, Cleveland just found 90 children in a month had high lead levels. Even Canada has had water problems. Yeah. So this is a national crisis. And unfortunately, both on the state level media as well as the national level, they just don't find it There's very little economic incentive for investigative reporting, and that's why we started Status Quo.
So you mentioned how the Michigan governor has now confirmed your reporting. Is that correct?
Yeah, so last night, she was on a panel with Flint residents, kind of like she's new. She just became governor in January, and she's trying to regain the trust because obviously the last governor kind of destroyed that. So she was on a panel, and a professor, Laura Sullivan, who's a professor at Kettering University in Flint, asked her about the water testing because Laura Sullivan and many others in the know were aware that the environmental agency was running the water first. And the governor actually said, confirming, she said, yes, there's definitely been reports that they were running the water for a long time when they shouldn't have been. So this was the first time that the governor has publicly said anything. And I'm gonna keep it real. I mean, it's been difficult to get the mayor to come out and publicly say anything. It's been difficult to get the congressman that represents Flint to come out and say anything. It's even been difficult to get progressives who you and I cover all the time to come out and say anything.
Yeah.
I don't know the reason, but yeah, the governor has confirmed it. And again, I met with the Solicitor General in February about this in person. I can't really go further than that, but it is being looked at. And really, the governor commenting on it publicly indicates to me she has looked into the agency and looked into what we found, because she was quoted in our original story, which people could find on Medium. So, yeah, the governor had confirmed that they were running the water. And just think of it this way to make it less scientific. Essentially, officials were standing there flushing away the evidence as, like, in many cases, single mothers were standing there with their kids, just excited that officials were doing something. It's really scandalous. Erin Brockovich actually is quoted in the story as just calling it a crime and cheating.
Yeah.
And I think the most important thing that I want people to get out of this documentary and the story is, if the testing was manipulated, how do we know what the current lead levels are in Flint? You know, there's been a lot of stories declaring the water as now back to normal based on what the state was reporting. But I could tell you, I mean, I can't declare yes, it's safe, or yes, it's no, but I can tell you based on what we found, the numbers were cooked. And that's scary because children might still potentially be drinking lead.
Yeah. So you mentioned Erin Brockovich there. Name some of the other politicians or activist celebrities that have recognized your reporting on this.
Yeah, some of the first were Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. She called for an investigation, as did Congressman Ro Khanna. I mean, I'm going to keep it real. I've spoken with Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's communications director about this. For whatever reason, she hasn't publicly said anything. Same thing with Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, who represents Detroit, which is right near Flint. I have reached out to Chairman Cummings many times, not directly, but his people. His person actually got back to me. I couldn't believe he said this, but like, yeah, we'll do some social media on this when the time is right.
Oh my God.
So I wrote,
It's unbelievable.
when would that time be? When they're dead?
Yeah.
Celebrities, Susan Sarandon has spoken out about this. Alyssa Milano has spoken out about this. There's been a lot of other, like kind of influencers on Twitter that have spoken out about this. But as far as politicians, there's just been Ro Khanna, Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, in fairness, sometimes you reach out to a politician's like communications person and they don't bring it to the politician. So
Yeah.
I don't know if Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is aware of this, but at the time I told her communications director, listen, like when she breathes, it becomes national news. So
Yeah.
if she could even tweet about this, it would be a major thing, because at the end of the day, we cannot depend on corporate media to do reporting on the people of Flint or any other vulnerable group. I mean, if I could prove that Putin did this, they'll cover it. But unfortunately, if it's just the old school journalism that knocks on doors and finds this, they don't seem to care. So it's definitely helpful when people like you and independent media cover this. I've been trying to get Democracy Now! And a few others to cover this, because it is 5 years. But I think the problem is sometimes, for example, at the White House Correspondents' Dinner last year, you had Michelle Wolf, the comedian, do a little like mic drop, and Flint still doesn't have clean water.
Yeah.
And for like an hour, all of a sudden, you have these Twitter warriors that suddenly care about Flint and are tweeting what a national disgrace is. But the next day, they're back to Trump and Russia.
Yeah.
Listen, I think Trump should be covered. I don't cover him as much because, like, what do I have to offer that 25,000 other people
Same
aren't
here.
saying?
Yeah, exactly.
But at the end of the day, forget Flint for a second. This is not just about Flint. At the end of the day, water is the most important thing you could have. I mean, if you don't have water for several days, you're going to get sick and eventually die. If you drink contaminated water, you might not die right away, but it's really going to screw your health. So if the news isn't treating this as a very important story, you have to wonder whether the news is still the news. Because if they don't treat water and the safety of our water as a major public health crisis in Flint and other places, then I think people are in trouble. Because at the end of the day, actual like journalism is shining a light and giving a voice to the voiceless. And I could tell you, and people will see in this documentary, these people are voiceless, and they have not had media to cover this. Because not only did we find that they were cheating on the testing, but I mean, we found that they were actually throwing out certain tests that were high to get the number down. We even found that they were putting homes on the official state testing program that had full filtration systems. You're supposed to be testing without filters.
Yeah.
But they had state-of-the-art. I mean, it was just like gross corruption. And as I always tell my viewers, the beauty of investigative reporting in this country, most corrupt individuals and agencies are very sloppy because they don't expect anyone to look.
Yeah.
So it's hard. I mean, I would have rather been at the beach last summer than knocking on 450 doors with my partner, by the way. Jen Dyes broke this with me. But I do it again because really it takes knocking on doors, speaking, not with like think tanks and experts, but like people. I mean, when I was stunned when I would just ask residents very simply like, oh, do you remember if they took the sample right away or let it run for a little bit? I mean, they were like, oh, yeah, they let it run. I'm like, how long? I don't know, like 5-10 minutes. I mean, it was just like out in the open corruption. So,
And this shows you, too, sort of a window into potentially other issues in the way that the EPA or other agencies are testing certain things. Like this is just a really a small sample of what's happening in Flint. Could be happening all around the country in not just about water, but about anything else. I mean, it shows you how sloppy the government is and how important it is to have reporters like you that are on the ground putting a light on this kind of thing.
Yeah, there's been reporting. The Guardian did good stuff. Even NBC did a story a few years ago where water utilities are just gaming the system because it's within their best interest to have lower numbers so they fall under the EPA's action level. Because if they go over the EPA's action level, then there's going to be you're going to have to throw money at the problem. And by the way, I mean, something that has not been told. So Flint's water issue, there's been money that's gone to changing service lines. So the service line is just the line from your curb into the house. But a lot of people's interior home plumbing was busted from the Flint River and that toxic water. Those aren't getting changed. So like, it's Easter, like Jesus can bless the water from the curb to the house. But if your home pipes are busted, you're still possibly having lead leach out. So part of the problem, Dave, is like, when a story's not sexy, like it ain't sexy talking about service lines into the house, right?
Yeah.
It's not sexy talking about water testing. It's not as sexy as like the new Cold War that Rachel Maddow has been putting out there. But at the end of the day, what is a bigger threat to democracy? Russian trolls on Facebook or people like being poisoned and then being left to die? And I will point out also, like, if you're a real journalist, I'm not like patting myself on the back. This is the story of a lifetime. I mean, you got corruption, you got environmental racism, environmental justice, Republicans, Democrats. So it's just shocking to me. I mean, on one end, it gives us a business because like we don't really have much competition. Like every time I go to Flint and other places, I'm alarmed. Like when they have press conferences and other things, like there's no national media outlets there. So it gives us a real opening. But at the same time, it's very sad. Like the Cleveland example I was telling you about, we were there in February, and there was a press conference that activists, local politicians held because 90 kids, mostly black, were found with high lead levels in 90 days, in a month, excuse me. We were the only cameras there. I mean, you would think in a normal media environment, like there would be cameras and newspaper reporters, like it's lead and children. Nobody. And ironically, that was the same day Trump declared his national, absurdity emergency. So, I agree. It's not just Flint. And by the way, it's not just lead. One of the things that's been missed here is there's other contaminants that are being found in water, including something called PFAS, which is cancer-causing chemicals that are made in the manufacturing of Teflon. They found this in water bodies in Michigan, in the Ohio River Valley, West Virginia, North Carolina. And frankly, a lot of people look to Canada for like healthcare and things like that. But there's corporate corruption in Canada too. So as you know, there needs to be more eyes on this. And I hope people check out the documentary. If you're a Status Quo member, which you could become a member at statusquo.com/join, you'll get it free. And we're premiering it early for members on Saturday. But for everybody else, it'll be available on Tuesday at flushingflint.com.
Awesome. All right. I'll also end on a clip from your trailer as well. And thanks again, Jordan, for joining me.
Thanks so much.
When the water changed color to brown and orange, your administration said the water was safe. When people reported rashes, hair loss, odor, and even sewage, your administration said the water was safe. When Legionnaire's disease began to infect and later kill numerous citizens, your administration said the water was safe.
I'm a journalist. I'm just asking residents on this block if the state ever came to test your water.
They told me they needed to go to the kitchen sink. That's where they went. They turned the water on, let it run for, like I said, like a minute, and collected their sample.
Your results are interesting because 15 parts per billion is the limit. So them telling you to let the water run for that long, that's probably why you were getting such low results.
When they did it, do you remember if they turned the water on and took the sample right away, or did they let it run first?
They let it run a while.
They showed up at my door and they handed me a pamphlet and said, okay, it's safe to bathe in, before they even went in my house.
Have you had any problems health-wise since the water switch?
Itching, breaking down, stuff like that.
My teeth, yeah, so.
And I've had pneumonia.
Our skin and our hair.
I've been getting a lot of boils.
Go ahead, get it. Bro, I'm telling you. And I get them like, just bro. And they were worse.
My daughter did have a miscarriage.
He was at Heritage Manor, went to McLaren where they had the Legionnaires. My father is dead. They want us out of here. They want to make it a college town, and we are not a fool. We know it. Go up and down the street. Look over there. We have a forest in the dadgum city.
We can't drink our water. We can't go outside and play. We ain't got no parks.
They're just going in, people who don't know EPA regulations, people that are older, people that are younger, people that are poor, whatever. And they're just right in front of them, cheating to try and get a lower number. So who the hell knows what the real numbers are? You always hear that talking point, well, like 3,000 other cities have worse numbers than Flint. I think what we're getting at here is we probably don't know the real lead levels in Flint because they've been flushing out the lead before they test.